Greetings. My name is Brian Brannon, and I am the chair-elect of the Federal Bar Association's ADR section, and I serve on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. In honor of the Centennial celebration of the 19th Amendment, a woman's right to vote, I'm conducting a series of interviews with female federal judges entitled A Woman's Way to the Federal Bench. Today, I'm honored to be joined by the Honorable Patricia Whalen. Judge Whalen has over 20 years of judicial experience, where she has served on the Bosnia and Herzegovina war crimes chambers. She founded the Rural Women Leadership Institute in Vermont, in addition to the Afghanistan Judicial Education Program, where she has led cultural exchanges with female Afghan judges in the state of Vermont for cultural and judicial cross-cultural sharing. Judge Whalen, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. My first question for you, Judge Whalen, is if you could tell the audience a little bit about your way to the international bench, milestones in your career, what's notable, and how you get to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yes, a long and twisted road for sure. I really came into the law not for any love of it. I was a young mother living in rural Vermont, and this was in the 70s, and my first exposure was to neighbors who were being physically abused in their home by their partners. And I, in an effort to sort of help them, I went looking for a woman attorney, and there was none in Windham County in 1975. So I proceeded to get involved with the Women's Center there, and we really were searching to really understand the whole domestic violence issue, but also to build resources. And in that study audit, we decided that somebody in the group should go to law school. I volunteered. I thought, oh, I like school, I'll go. So I went to Vermont Law School at the time. And my real issue there was just access to justice. I mean, I was really trying to figure out how we can get women in court faster, more efficiently, and more humanely. Through that law school process, I would like to say that I, fell in love with the law, but not really. To me, it was just sort of, like somebody would learn a skill to do a job. I really was kind of nuts and bolts about it. I had a professor named Lowell Schechter who just died this past year. And he really was the person that changed everything for me. He was very much interested in international law. And he was interested in the whole issue of human rights and what tied us together, our kind of common humanity. And I think then I saw domestic violence in a much bigger and broader issue of not just marginalization of women, and victimization of women, but also economic injustice. All sorts of things came into play. And then also realizing that it wasn't just in the United States, but this was, in every culture worldwide. So I received, when I graduated from law school, I got a fellowship from Howard University, Reginald Heber Smith Fellow. That was assigned to Vermont Legal Aid, and I loved working for Vermont Legal Aid. I was there for 11 years. And again, that gave me the opportunity to work on not just domestic violence issues, but elderly abuse issues, and of course, economic injustice issues. So I love that. And I probably would have been there, but for Madeline Kunin, who was Vermont's first women governor. She appointed 10 women to the bench, and I was one of them. And that I was appointed to be a family court magistrate, which was a court of limited jurisdiction position. It was a brand new family court, and all of which was, to me, very exciting. But I quickly realized in the broader issue of the judiciary, people just felt you know, it really wasn't much to be a family court magistrate. You were just going to work on child support issues. And of course, my view was, wait a minute, I get to really work on the support of children. I mean, what could be more important? But apparently in the judiciary, lots of things are more important than that. But I really went into it with the understanding that this was a chance to really develop a judiciary that would be responsive to parents, not just women, but men as well, to really help and support them in a time of crisis, but also to make sure that children were supported in that process, and not just financially, but also emotionally and as well. So for me, it was a wonderful job. But I recognized early on that, you know, women's issues are always marginalized, and things that were important to us as women weren't important to the judiciary at large. And so I started to fight for those issues. Vermont judiciary is wonderfully supportive, and my mentor judge was Judge Shireen Fisher. And do you know Judge Fisher at all? She later became president of the Sierra Leone Tribunal, the Special Court of Sierra Leone. She also was a judge in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I bring this up to say, not only was she incredibly supportive of me, but we loved working together. And I think everything I learned that's worth knowing as a judge, I really feel like I learned from her. She was a great mentor. And so I was on the bench in Vermont for 17 years. Part of that was I went part-time. If you want to know the whole story of how I actually got there, this is it.
Yes.
That was unheard of, you know, a part-time judge. Who's a part-time judge? Everybody said, you know, no one is going to take you seriously. And, you know, part of me was thinking, I'm not sure they take me seriously anyway, but what I need to do things for myself. And one of that was to care for my parents. They were elderly, and my brother and I made a commitment to try to keep them at home. So in order to do that, we both had to reorganize our work lives. And I just couldn't be a full-time judge and do the kind of care that my parents needed. So I wrote to the Supreme Court and asked if it was a possibility to go half-time. They were really supportive of me, and I have to say they've always been supportive of me in all my endeavors. But I had to write a statute. I had to get the statute passed. There was, you know, it was not an easy path, but we created the ability for a judge to go half-time, and that's still on the books in Vermont. One thing was they thought, well, who's going to really apply for your other half-time position? And of course, what I knew was that lots of women would. It would, especially women, but also men. There were people that were just recognizing they had commitment to younger children, you know, or just had, you know, wanted to be in a position so they could also have the ability to follow some other pursuits, such as writing or research or things like that. So it, you know, it worked out very well. I went half-time. I was able to care for my parents. After they both died, though, that I was still half-time, and I didn't have really any lofty way to fill my other half of the time. But so but one day, you know, I was really interested in what was happening with women in Afghanistan, but I had particularly seen a letter circulated by a woman judge who explained that all the judges had been removed from the bench, and, you know, all the difficulties in their life. And I was really, you know, sort of fascinated by that, and also recognizing that something that I love so much to have it taken away that way or lost. You know, I just felt I had a lot of empathy for the women judges in Afghanistan. So eventually, I was able to start this project with the help of some other friends. And we created this Afghan women judges program, which was, at the time I worked with the International Association of Women Judges, and they were able to secure funding for this. And then it was just a wild 10-year adventure of bringing Afghan women judges here to the United States, specifically to Vermont. They did spend a week in Washington, D.C. And it was just an amazing, life-affirming, wonderful experience that, you know, where it was one of those experiences where, as people say, you always learn more than what you give. And that was certainly true of that. But it gave me a real appreciation of the rule of law. I mean, things that we took for granted here in the US and take for granted every minute of the day was impossible barriers to them. And but we had, I could spend, hours talking about that project. But also being half-time, it gave me the ability to get involved in other judicial things, such as working on treaties. And Judge Fisher, again, my mentor in life, had since left the Vermont judiciary. She was getting a PhD in human rights, international human rights from in London. And part of her interest was in the children's treaties at The Hague, international private law. So we were both selected to be experts there on the writing and drafting of what is known as the Maintenance Treaty, which was a treaty for the enforcement, establishment and enforcement of both maintenance, spousal maintenance, and child support. So I worked on that for 5 years. And as part of that, I certainly got thrown into international law. And granted, I was in the private international law side of things, but The Hague's a small world, and international law is actually a fairly small world. And the court of Bosnia and Herzegovina at that time was looking for judges who felt comfortable working both in civil law as well as common law. And the statutes that they were working for in Bosnia, like the tribunals in general, are all hybrids of common and civil law. So treaty work is essentially that, because if you write anything, it has to be implemented in this particular instance, I think it was 92 countries we were writing a treaty for. So whatever sentence you wrote had to ultimately be able to be implemented both in common law and civil law jurisdictions. So both Judge Fisher and I became experienced in that. And then from there, we went to the court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Judge Fisher went first, and then she really wanted me to she kind of really encouraged me to also apply. At the time, I think this is really important for judges in general. All of my experience had been in primarily in family law. And even though I worked quite a bit with both domestic violence and elderly abuse, and as a consequence of that, I would work on the criminal aspects of all those issues. But I was not a criminal lawyer by any means, and certainly did not have that kind of judicial experience. And I thought, how is this going to translate? How do you go from sort of child support to war crimes? But the thing is that, judges are, a judge is a judge is a judge. It's really, it's that thing you learn in law school. What is a trial? A hearing, you can call it lots of different names, but fundamentally it is the same set of steps. And certainly, fair hearing rights are the same. That's what was important to me. The other thing that was important to me is that they didn't have the death penalty, and it was under the European Court of Human Rights, and so that was prohibited. I went over to see the court. I wasn't going to apply until I saw it. I wanted to make sure that it had all of the elements of a fair trial proceeding. I was really impressed by the way the court was set up and how it was operating. And then I was very fortunate to have the support of a lot of people and got selected for that position. But I went over thinking, this is like true confessions here. I went over thinking, okay, in family court, you really deal with the worst that people can do to each other. And it's sort of good people that once loved each other or hopefully cared for each other, kind of doing unspeakable harm to each other often. And I'm talking about the most severe kinds of cases in family court. You have sexual abuse of a child by a father, for example. What could be worse than that? And that's actually what I thought. I thought, what could be worse than that? And I also thought very, I don't know, naively, that these are cases where the harm has already occurred. And in family court, the harm is always not just ongoing, but you can yourself add harm to it by your decision. So everything you do, it weighs on you and has to be really careful. And you don't know if what you've done is the right thing, especially as regards to children, until years later, a decade later or so. So I thought, well, the war's over, conflict's done, it's in the past, and I would be judging the past, so to speak, and that had to be significantly easier. I was appointed to the trial court, the first instance trial court, and there was an appellate court above me, so I thought, well, how bad could it be, right? And of course, the magnitude of working on these issues, I think could have overwhelmed me, but again, the court experience itself had incredible people. The national judges that we worked with in Bosnia and Herzegovina were really inspiring. And then again, my first year I had as a mentor, Judge Fisher, who was always inspiring. So, that was the beginning of my term there. And as it turned out, I was the longest international judge to be there. And the trials I worked on were quite significant. The first trial, Judge Fisher worked on the first trial that had genocide as an issue. And her excellent decision was not ultimately confirmed in whole by the appellate court. My case, which involved one perpetrator, and he was the highest ranking person at that point to be tried in Bosnia and Herzegovina, was a referral case from the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY, had transferred that case to our court to be heard. And it was actually the first conviction of genocide throughout both the ICTY and Bosnia to be confirmed for genocide. So the appellate court eventually confirmed the decision in full. And up until then, other courts had decided that there was a crime of genocide, and appellate courts affirmed that the crime was genocide, but they hadn't actually convicted anybody of it. Everyone was convicted of aiding and abetting or a lesser offense. So Milorad Turbish, which is my case, he was the first person to actually be convicted of the crime. So in terms of milestones, that was a significant one for me.
Absolutely.
And so that was sort of the end of my legal career. I retired, so to speak, as a judge after that. I was there for the 5 years. I did stay on at the court for 2 years as a special advisor, working on specific issues around judicial education and really support for the court. Because when I left at the end of, in 2012, that was the end of the international involvement with the court, and it became a national court hearing war crimes. And it was, in my opinion, and probably everyone else's opinion, it was really a premature decision to pull the internationals out from the court. Because the truth was, what I found out when I was there, is that the fighting stopped, but the war was still going on, and the war is still going on today there in so many ways. It just has taken on a different flavor. You know, they have tremendous corruption and abuse of power in the country that can be as deadly as bullets.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Judge Whalen, your career is fantastic. You wrote your own statute to be a part-time judge in the state of Vermont. You wrote your own treaty, which launched you into the international space. And all along you had Judge Fisher as a mentor. Those are 3 really important milestones that I heard in your story of your way to the international bench. Thank you so much for your service. In terms of voluntary bar activities, what role did they play in your career trajectory?
Well, I would say I was part of the National Association of Women Judges, as well as the International Association of Women Judges. And both organizations gave me tremendous support to do projects and to, work in projects. In terms of, in fact, one of the things that I did in the Afghan project was try to work with establishing bar associations in Afghanistan. And I was over in Afghanistan in 2007. And part of what the State Department also was interested in was the creation of a bar association to actually support the work of the judiciary as sort of a fundamental underpinning. And so when I went there, I didn't cover. I was there as a guest of women judges. And I asked him, I had no problem covering. I said, I want to do whatever is mostly comfortable for you. And they said, well, we don't have a choice, but you have a choice. And it would be really important to exercise that choice. So I said, well, okay, I don't choose to cover, so I didn't. And I had to go meet the Minister of Justice at the time, who also had somewhat of an interest in bar associations. And in order to do that, his office was on top of the Ministry of Interior building, which is like the building that I think did not have good stuff happen in it under the Taliban, the reign of the Taliban. And it was just filled with men on either side of the stairs. And I had to walk up, I don't know how many flights of stairs, like 4 flights of stairs. And, men were spitting at me. The interpreter that was with me was so up. She was just completely, almost hysterical. And she said, I don't think we're going to make it to the 4th floor. And I said, we're just going to keep walking, just keep walking. And we'll be okay. We got up and we were okay. We got up to the 4th floor, and she had said, oh my God, you can't believe the things they were saying about you. I can't even repeat what they were saying about you. And I said, well, you can't repeat what I was thinking about them either. So we're completely fair, it's like, just call it even. And, I walked in, and then just incredible man, Mr. Razuli, who was the Minister of Justice at the time. Sat us down, had tea. I think he had a pretty good idea of what my experience was walking up the steps. And I had to immediately start talking about the importance of bar associations. I mean, it was like kind of bizarre, right?
Right,
But,
yeah.
He
Quite
looked
the
at me and he
spit.
said, you know what? He said, look, let me explain something to you about development and development of legal systems. And he said, all of those men you saw, every single man you saw, from the time you entered the building, coming into my office, the person that's bringing you, tea, he said, I am the only person who can read. And he said, we have bigger issues here, in Afghanistan than bar associations. And it was kind of, it it reminded me of what I think bar associations actually can do is not ever lose sight of the fundamentals. Why are they there? What is,
Yeah.
they are linchpins for the rule of law and supporting people that work within the rule of law. But I think we get, we have a lot of projects all the time and trying to come back and say what's really important. I mean, he was basically saying if the Bar Association, I can form them and they can teach literacy, then it's got to roll. But having said that, not sure I'm a member of my own bar association. I think pretty much, as far as I can tell, it's the annual dinner. There are a few other things that, of course, it does, and I don't want to make light of that. They really support the pro bono law projects in Vermont and things like that, and that's very close to my heart.
Yeah.
The International Association of Women Judges, I think, actually had a role in both attorneys and judges supporting the rule of law in emerging countries and making sure that there's more diversity on the bench and things like that.
Wonderful. And the Afghan Women Justice, the Afghanistan Judicial Education Program was in collaboration with the International
They
Association.
actually secured the funding. I mean, there were 4 of us in Vermont who started it in different fields, education and politics. I was the only lawyer in the group. And we really, we wanted to do the project, but the work of the project, I mean, seeking funding, all of that type of stuff, we went to the International Association and they were happy to be involved. And they also had a piece of it. They sort of organized the Washington, D.C. piece. And we had tremendous support too from the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Sandra Day O'Connor, all of them were just incredible. They gave a tea every year for the judges at the Supreme Court. And
amazing.
That was always a highlight. Of course, the judges had no clue who they were meeting. To be perfectly fair to them, only later on, them as judges, as the Afghan judges were exposed much more to the world and to the issues involved, of course, they knew who they were meeting with. But those early groups of judges we brought, they really had no understanding, I think, of what it would mean for even someone like me to have tea with Supreme Court justices. It was quite moving. And they were wonderful.
Wonderful experience. The Federal Bar Association, obviously, it's where a lot of Supreme Court justices come from. And so what a special moment for you. My last question for you, Judge Whalen, is today we celebrate the 19th Amendment. It's been 100 years. What do you foresee the next 100 years to mean in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the legal profession?
Well, I think we have to get to it, don't we? I mean, I think that, the law, to me, much of my experience with it has been about money and power, and, there's a lot of, clearly, when I first started practicing law, I never saw a woman judge. I mean, women attorneys, we were few and far between. And so, of course, the picture has completely changed. Now there's, women throughout the judiciary. I'm not so sure that we still don't undervalue what's important to women, however, in women's issues. If you ask any attorney, what's more important, a complex, case involving banks and corporations and, tearing Microsoft apart or whatever, compared to the welfare of a child, most people still think of that as social work. And I think for me, it just points out that what is the rule of law all about? What is it that we are, working to support? And, it has to start with individual human rights and go up from there, or go out from there, or go under from there. I don't know. But I don't think it's, you have to look, we're not a diverse judiciary yet. People don't see themselves, or most people still don't see themselves in the face of the judiciary. We don't have enough people of color. We don't have enough people that represent immigrant communities. There's even within staffing within it. I mean, I can't speak, I'm not obviously a federal judge or have worked in that kind of system. And probably I'm a lot more formed by the issues that state courts have, which is a real struggle for funding and being able to do resources for, court certified interpreters for people coming into the court, just things like that. And obviously the whole criminal justice system, we have to just really step back and say, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And I think the why are we doing it is as important as taking a hard look at what we are doing. The law has to be responsible to the people that it serves. And I think that one thing that's difficult for a lot of judges is that as they increasingly rise up in the judiciary, they become farther removed from community. And there's reasons for that, and I understand reasons for that. And I myself, especially in rural Vermont, you have to be very careful about creating conflicts of interest because there's so few judges in Vermont to serve. You can't put yourself in situations where you're constantly having to recuse yourself. So there's some practical issues around that. But judges really need to be part of the community. They need to understand what people they're serving are going through. I think all of us should experience, what it's like to be arrested, what it's like to, how all these systems work, how many judges actually go into the prisons, and see those kinds of, see what's there. And probably more of them do than I'm aware of. But in my experience, judges are often happy to be removed from it. They feel like their jobs are stressful enough. And they, I don't know if it comes with public service, this attitude that you deserve something back from the public. You deserve that kind of respect in that space. And while there may be some truth to that, I think judges have to get over themselves a little bit and, get out there and see how disenfranchised people feel in the justice system in general. It's hard. It's a hard thing to look at, especially when you think you're doing lofty and wonderful work, and many people are. But people are in the streets these days, and we have to pay attention to why that is.
Absolutely. Judge Whalen, thank you so much. You are a superstar, a treasure for the state of Vermont and our country. Thank you so much for your service and taking the time today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you much. You've written statutes, you've written treaties, and you had a female mentor along the way. You've been active in voluntary bar associations, and we have some work to do in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the next 100 years. Thank you again. This once more is a woman's way to the federal bench. It's been a profile interview with Her Honor, Patricia Whalen, for the War Crimes Chamber of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you again, Judge Whalen.
Thank you.